In the time around World War II, home bakers everywhere were looking for a way to make baking faster and more convenient, along with food shortages and rationing. Betty Crocker cake mixes, released by General Mills, would change the world of baking. The General Mills brand dates back to the mid-1800s. Cadwallader C. Washburn founded the Minneapolis Mill Company in 1856, thinking to lease power rights along the Mississippi River to millers. He bought the land owned by a failed Minneapolis mill in 1866, spending $100,000 to construct a new modern mill on the site. Although people called the mill Washburn's Folly and believed that no mill so large should have been constructed so far west, Washburn believed that there would be demand for Midwestern wheat. By 1874, he had the capital to construct yet another, larger mill, the Washburn A Mill. In September 1877, he partnered with his brother and John Crosby, forming the Washburn-Crosby Company. But tragedy struck almost immediately. An explosion leveled the A Mill and 5 other buildings on May 2, 1878, temporarily crippling production. Bringing in new, safer equipment, the mill was rebuilt, including this time the steel rollers that made their mill the world's first automated mill. The A Mill reached a capacity of 5,500 barrels of flour per day, foremost among mills until the advent of Pillsbury's own A Mill in 1881. 2 years later, in 1880, the millers competed in the International Millers Exposition in Cincinnati, sweeping the competition and prompting Washburn Crosby to label their flour best in the world. The company picked up 3 medals at the expo, with their highest quality flour coming away with the gold medal. About 2 months after the victory on June 8th, some sacks of the Washburn-Crosby flour began to go out, renamed as gold medal flour in honor of their outstanding achievement. The name took over, and the flour became one of the industry standards and is still the #1 flour brand in America today. The Washburn-Crosby Company received thousands of requests each year in the late 1910s and early 1920s for answers to baking questions. In 1921, managers decided that it would be more intimate to sign the responses personally. They combined the last name of a retired company executive, William Crocker, with the first name Betty, which was thought of as warm and friendly. Eventually, this fictional icon would even have her own portrait, updated many times since. It was then in 1928 that the Washburn-Crosby Company merged together with approximately 24 other companies to create General Mills Incorporated, which we know the company as today. The origins of cakes date back to medieval ages, with spices and raisins as popular ingredients. The first cakes were more like bread sweetened with honey. Medieval European bakers often made fruit cakes and gingerbread, and these foods could last for many months. According to food historians, modern cakes were first baked in Europe sometime in the mid-17th century. This is due primarily to advances in technology like more reliable ovens, the manufacture and availability of food molds, and ingredient availability, especially refined sugar. It was not until the middle of the 19th century that cake as we know it today arrived on the scene, made with extra refined white flour and baking powder instead of yeast. The very marketable premise behind cake mixes was, and still is, the ability to have a fresh, homemade cake with very little time and effort. However, with the food rationing of World War II and general economic problems, cake was considered more of a luxury rather than an average treat or dessert. General Mills would tackle this obstacle like no other company ever had before. Under the Betty Crocker label, General Mills introduced their finest boxed cake mix, with the first variety being ginger cake. Though there had been mixes created before it, this one from General Mills was different. Betty Crocker had always stood for quality in the minds of consumers, but during the first half of the 20th century, convenience foods were not associated with good eating. All that changed when the first General Mills brand Betty Crocker cake mixes hit America's shelves in 1947. Just Add Water and Mix was the campaign for this new product, and the first of Betty Crocker's cake mixes was launched. However, there was still something that had consumers responding not as well as General Mills had expected. Certainly, cake mixes sold, but compared with the early performance of Bisquick or Aunt Jemima pancake mix, not up to industry expectations. Puzzled, marketers reiterated the message that homemakers need only drop this scientific marvel into a bowl, add water, mix, and bake. Market research revealed the problem. It was too easy. The problem, according to the psychologists, was eggs. Dr. Ernest Dichter, in particular, believed that powdered eggs, often used in cake mixes, should be left out so women could add a few fresh eggs into the batter, giving them a sense of creative contribution. He believed that baking a cake was an act of love on the woman's part. Adding only water eliminated the feeling of pride in having baked a cake. They reformulated the mix and asked bakers to add the eggs yourself. The result helped the brand gain popularity and made housewives feel connected to the food they were making. Whether the psychologists were right, or whether cakes made with fresh eggs simply taste better than cakes made with dried eggs, General Mills decided to play up the fact that Betty Crocker's cake mixes did not contain dried eggs of any kind. Before long, cake mix started to gain some acceptance and notoriety. Even First Lady Mamie Eisenhower instructed her cooking staff to use this novel invention at the White House.
I'm Betty Crocker, and I promise you a perfect cake every time you bake. That's right, perfect. You be the judge. Or write General Mills, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and get your money back. Remember, I guarantee a perfect cake every time you bake, cake after cake after cake.
General Mills is second only to Kellogg's in the cereal market, and it owns a number of notable brands including Green Giant, Cheerios, and Pillsbury. The company has long been a pioneer in the realm of packaged foods and baking mixes, and it continually releases new inventions. In the 1990s, General Mills was one of the first companies to recognize the growing health food craze, and it responded by rolling out numerous lines of healthy products. The company also jumped onto the green business bandwagon early, promoting itself as a corporate good citizen interested in protecting the environment. Not to mention that they employ more than 34,000 people around the world. The impact of Betty Crocker cake mixes was huge. It not only simplified the process of baking a cake, but it revolutionized baking to what we know it as today. In the 50s, when there was little refrigeration and canning was the main form of food preservation, the shelf-safe, fast, and delicious mix was convenience at its peak. And in 1950, when Betty Crocker's picture cookbook was released, its sales rivaled those of the Bible. As time has gone on, Betty Crocker has published more than 250 cookbooks since the 1950s. The Betty Crocker brand also produces countless other products, including brownie mixes, boxed family meals, and even mixes for gluten-free desserts. When my mother, Captain Sharon Meshke, was stationed in Iraq from 2005 to 2007, I was able to mail her a Betty Crocker Warm Delights cake for her birthday. Even overseas, she was able to enjoy the goodness of a home-baked cake, another innovation in the world of baking. Today, most people make cakes from mixes instead of buying pre-made cakes, and the real scratch cake is rarely made. Betty Crocker cake mixes were a turning point in baking. The time-consuming and careful preparation to bake a cake was no longer necessary, and you could still feel the pride of baking a cake. Betty Crocker has also helped generations of American women over the years deal with challenges, including food scarcity during the Depression and World War II, a renewed emphasis on homemaking in the post-war years, and the increasing sophistication of American taste. One public opinion poll taken in the 1940s even rated her as the second most famous woman in America after Eleanor Roosevelt. Hundreds of cookbooks and products later, along with radio and TV shows, she became such a part of American life that it made Betty, a fictional icon, real. So real, in fact, that the Minneapolis suburb of Golden Valley, Minnesota, where General Mills is headquartered, has a street named after her.